Whoops. Oh yeah, now I know what I'm doing. I'm making a fire, aren't I? I'm baking some potatoes in the oven, and I thought to myself, oh, what shall I have for them? And I thought, you should make your fire, and then in the 90 minutes to 2 hours it takes for that potato to bake, that's when I can contemplate other stuff. Yes, like what I'm going to eat with my potato tonight. Potato. What a great vegetable the potato is. I know in times of plenty I'd be quite happy to just have eat smoked salmon and berries. Oh yeah. Oh, I'll be very happy doing that. But also, I'd what's it called? Oh yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of getting some smoked salmon. Yeah, sorry, I'm just my mind's running away with me, thinking how much I'd like to eat some smoked salmon and oh yeah. No, I'm thinking I have hinted this in, but again, nothing set in stone, so I ought not to get my hopes up as well. But there may be a place where I'm going to, where seafood is readily abundant. I thought, oh yes, I'll have to try other fish, and then just sort of circling back to smoked salmon and thinking, why isn't there trout? Because trout's just as good as smoked salmon. But hey ho, doesn't matter. That's just that's a me in the future problem. A me right now problem is it's 16.1 degrees and the sun's gone down. So is that? Yeah, it's Winston. Now I have seen cigarette butts in that. Oh bugger! Oh, why'd you have to fall down? Silly thing. Look at it. It's like right there, and that's why you have a concrete or stone surround for your fireplace or stove. I'll whip that back in it as well. When I was first clearing out the chimney, there's all sorts of old bits in there. It's really saw quite a time lapse as well. Like seeing things from 2010 or older in there, and yeah, Winston cigarette. When did they stop selling Winston cigarettes in the United Kingdom? Winston. That's the ones like the Beverly Hillbillies are sponsored by Winston cigarettes, and the old gran, she'd have a corncob pipe, and she'd just put the ciggy into it and light it and smoke it that way, and then like the cigarette salesman's like, you can like just smoke it directly. It's got a filter in it, you see, because that was a big thing back then. Like, oh yeah, these filters are sure good, and making filters out of asbestos and then changing to fiberglass, and I don't know what they use now, but yeah, a few little teething issues with the filters in early pre-rolled cigarettes, so I think they worked them out mostly. One of the other fun things with that is, you see, when doing like commercial inorganic farming, like they're quite fond of doing in the United States, they use this NPK fertilizer, so natrium, potassium. Hang on, Natrium, yeah, that's sodium. Potassium, and the K, is the K phosphorus? Or is K potassium and the P is phosphorus? Yeah, so natrium and then whatever the K is, that's. But anyway, NPK fertilizer used a lot in commercial farms, and it's how you end up with bland food that don't taste of much, but it's food, because the soil is pretty much sand at that point, and if it wasn't for the artificial fertilizer used in it, so no, no, I'm being dumb here. Why would you want sodium in fertilizer? NPK, it's obviously nitrogen, phosphorus, and K is potassium. Anyway, use those ingredients. Well, the phosphorus is mined, and phosphorus mining is a very toxic and radioactive thing because there's a fair bit of radium and radon gas and thorium and uranium in the phosphorus. All sorts of radioactive substances are there. And the phosphorus refining is not 100% pure, doesn't have to be. So those plants end up soaking particles of radioactive particles. I was just thought, no, rather than enlisting all the elements I know what are radioactive, just say radioactive particles. And turns out, when you smoke something which is ionizing radiation, which gives off alpha particles, well, alpha particles in themselves are relatively low power and benign and easily stopped by skin, if not a sheet of paper. Beta radiation is stopped by sheets of lead, and gamma radiation isn't stopped. You just sort of hope that your magnetosphere or the atmosphere itself is going to be like you're sufficiently far away from the gamma burst that it's not really an issue. So yeah, alpha particles. If you inhale a substance giving off alpha radiation, that's going to start causing mutation and copying errors in the soft tissue, because it doesn't have the protection of your epithelial cells. Epithelial cells? Epithelial cells. Your epidermis is showing. See, look, there's my epidermis showing. Oh, look, it's quite red today. I had a bath, you see, so got all my calipers, the little tiny blood vessels. Only one hemoglobin can go through. Capillaries, my capillaries are dilated because I is hot, although I won't be hot for very long if I don't get this fire going. So let's do that. So anyway, smoking is bad for your health because tobacco, some of it at least, is farmed using radioactive fertilizer. Now, some could say, well, hang on, NPK fertilizer is not just used for tobacco, it's used in a host of food crops, what people eat. And if you're the sort that looks at primary data, which again seems to be this lost art of, well, how do you come to your conclusions? By look at the data. So you can do this thing called looking at primary data. It used to be much easier in the past when we had these things called search engines. You see, we had search engines. No, you might be familiar with like websites like Google.com, and you type a search query into it, and it comes up with a bunch of results it thinks you ought to have. Well, in the past, it was very similar, but these search engines, what they do is you'd ask them a question, and it would present you information that pertains to the question rather than here's a curated list of results which we think is pertinent to you, as well as here's a bunch of websites that are generated by AI which talk about the subject, therefore indexed in the search query, yet don't really have anything to do with it, and the information is vague and non-specific. So anyway, back in back in the day, it was possible to use search engines, and you get spreadsheets and databases and graphs and tables. And if you wanted to know something like prevalence of gastrointestinal and lung cancer, and then correlate it with prevalence of phosphorus refining and the prices of NPK fertilizer over the years, you can do those sorts of things. And then you'll be able to go and look, like say, oh, that line follows that line, or oh, here's a crossover. When that line goes up, that line goes down. And you can say there's a correlation between these lines. And I'm not going to even humour correlation doesn't equal causation. No, that's where you're supposed to draw your conclusions. Your conclusions you draw may be accurate or inaccurate. I mean, one of my favourite examples of an inaccurate conclusion leading to accurate results is the miasma theory of infection. So, to my knowledge, there are three theories of disease and contamination infection. So one of them's germ theory, which Louis Pasteur demonstrated using, he had these two vessels which were linked together, and yeah, that's it. So it had a loop going up and a loop going down. You can look at Pasteur's experiments, and he was saying that, well, look, this sample here of gone off milk smells really bad, and you know if you drink it you'll be sick. But it's not spreading in, it's not contaminating this other bit of milk. But here's me mixing a bit of it, and look how quickly this milk turns and curdles. So he was saying this proves that miasma, just the bad smell alone, is not what's carrying the disease, but it's in fact germs. It's some microscopic life form inside which is breeding and replicating. And the other theory I've heard, which I don't know much about, is the terrain theory. The idea that if the conditions are right for diseases, they will appear spontaneously. And things like colds and cough spreading during winter is coincidence, because everyone at that time is run down and under the weather because we've got no sunshine. So, yeah. Well, anyway, those are the three. Now, why am I talking about germ theory? Oh, yeah, that's right. There used to be a time you could use search engines to... I'm going to have to review this now because I've forgotten my point. But there was a time you could use search engines to come to conclusions. And one example of, oh yeah, that's it, accurate and inaccurate things. You see, miasma theory, inaccurate conclusion, but accurate results in that you're right to avoid things which smell bad because they'll make you ill, but it's not the bad smell itself doing it. Now, you could say, well, we've got a bit more nuanced understanding that now. We can understand the psychological stress of smelling certain unpleasant, noxious substances actually does have a knock-on effect to the immune system. And if you understand the holographic fractal nature of reality, which supports homeopathy, it doesn't matter that you're only getting a few microscopic particles into your nose. It's still enough to cause some people to vomit. Which you could say, oh, well, that's purely a psychological response. Well, I find it interesting that it's a response at all. Because you're not getting sick, but you're actually physically vomiting because of a bad smell. And that's your body saying, oh, look, this is dangerous. I better purge what's in myself because it might be food poisoning. See, that again might be an inaccurate conclusion. Maybe, someone in 100 years' time will say, well, yes, that's what our ancestors believed, but now we understand the mechanism for these parasympathetic actions is based on this thing. So the reason you vomit when you want to get away from bad smells is not because, oh, I've got food poisoning, but it's something else. Who knows? See, I'm not claiming that I'm any more enlightened than my Victorian ancestors. They worked with what knowledge they had to hand, and the miasma theory was pretty close. So this is why I think it's people shouldn't be frightened to come to conclusions, even if they're inaccurate, because the funny thing is that can actually help people find the truth. So I'd say it's good. It's good, and especially if it yields useful results, but it's not the truth, but it helps you find the truth. Well, isn't that a form of truth in itself? I know somebody might say, "Oh, actually, no, you're getting these terms incorrect, and this is what you're trying to say." I welcome anybody correcting me on that one here, because I don't think I'm articulating this thought too well. We shall see. But yeah. Oh, and as for the fractal nature of reality, if you have a hologram and you split the hologram, say like you've got a hologram of a bird and you cut out like the bottom left corner of it, well, what happens then is you don't have just 1/4 of that bird like you expected. Oh well, if I cut up this picture, I'll get 1/4 of the picture. No, what you end up with is a smaller hologram of the bird, and you can keep on doing that. Eventually, it will lose resolution because you're getting smaller and smaller. But this is, I find, a useful analogy for explaining homeopathy, which makes me wonder if we're. Now, here's a fun thought, right? How do you make a neutral water for homeopathy if what you're doing is that the water you're using, it's got all this previous memory in it, because it's a liquid crystal and it retains memory of all the substances that have been dissolved in it, as well as the intentions, as we can see from late Dr. Masaru Emoto, who did some very interesting photography of ice crystals, snowflakes, that's it. And it turns out that water can respond to intent, not just substances dissolved in it. So that's why homeopathy, I'm not willing to dismiss it. I think there's some merit in there, but I would like to understand how you do it. Now, is that to say that in order to make a good homeopathy, you must use primordial water, or you must generate novel water through hydrogen condensation? Because those are the only two sources I can think of water that doesn't have a substance charge. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, that hydrogen I'm burning, where did that come from? And does that retain knowledge? I don't know if, say, you were to do cracking of water into hydrogen and oxygen and then burn it again, so you end up with novel water, just pure water. Would that, have, by doing that, have you reset the liquid crystal's memory? Have you done like a factory refresh on it? And in terms of what I understand of physical science, that novel water, in terms of physical properties, as long as no contaminants get into the reaction, you're going to end up with water which is like what they use for making integrated circuits, the ultra pure water, which in itself is a very interesting technological challenge, because one of the ways you use for measuring contaminants in the supply of water is you shine a beam of light for it, usually a laser beam, and then you count the number of particles that are being reflected in that beam. That's all well and good until you get to something like less than 10 parts per million contamination. I think it's 10 parts per million. I may have the number wrong. If you search for ultra pure water on YouTube, you can see probably a half-hour long documentary on it. I think they get to a certain point that the contaminants no longer make the using a laser beam to count it an effective way. And I don't know what they use for measuring contaminants, or if they're just guessing. It's a very interesting science, because you're basically asking for, like, how good is our precision measuring equipment? But point being, this ultra pure water, it's got nothing in it, absolutely nothing. Would that be suitable for use in homeopathy? Would that retain a holographic memory of the substances that are previously dissolved in it? And if so, could that introduce contamination into a silicon wave you're etching, because there's, you know, some ephemeral reaction between it? I mean, obviously you're not going to leave any residue on the silicon, no physical residue. That in itself, I'm not sure we'll be able to answer it in my lifetime, but I would love to know the answer for that, because I think this is a sorely misunderstood area of science. Water is one of those, for something which is so vital. I mean, it is the world's most important solvent. We know so little about how water works, or what it does, or why it does it. It's really laughable in a way, but I guess there's maybe there is research being done about it, but I've never heard of anything. Yeah. These thoughts sometimes keep me awake at night. I sort of think, well, how on earth would I go about measuring that? And I think that's where I'd have to collaborate with other people who could see it in a different angle. What I'm basically saying is, I need a team so I can research water, because I think it's a worthy subject of study. I did. I don't even know how to describe that experiment. I did do an experiment once with samples of salt water and carbon electrodes measuring resistance. But I'll have to find my findings. I probably did something wrong there, but the resistance numbers I was getting, they didn't make sense. Not the way I'd expected, though. Yeah. Right, I think we got a fire, haven't we? No. I'll get some stew going. Set a timer. I've been doing this for 23 minutes, so if I set my timer for 17 minutes, that will give the potatoes an hour and a half in the oven. And yeah, I think that's me done. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see if I can find a bit more research about ultra pure water, homeopathy, and primordial water. Bye.